Welcome to this explainer. You know, evolution is almost always framed to us as this grand race to survive, right? We immediately think of predator and prey, camouflage, survival of the fittest, all that stuff. But when we actually look at the data, the true biological goal is something entirely different. The real underlying mandate of biology is propagation, even if that very act of propagation is what ends up killing you.
Okay, let's dive into this. What if your greatest evolutionary advantage was also, quite literally, a death sentence? I mean, natural selection absolutely demands that you live long enough to pass on your genes. But as we're going to see illustrated in the data today, sometimes the exact physical tools and strategies an animal evolves to pass on those genes turn out to be completely 100% fatal.
Section 1. Survival versus propagation. Sexual selection often pushes animals into some truly extreme physical territory. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this concept called the Handicap Principle. It's a foundational evolutionary theory suggesting that some animals intentionally grow massive, completely burdensome reproductive organs or ornaments. Why? Well, because they're effectively shouting to potential mates, hey, look at me. I am so incredibly fit and healthy that I can survive even while carrying around this ridiculous physical disadvantage. But we're going to look at 5 specific times in the animal kingdom where this so-called handicap went way, way too far and became a literal death sentence.
Section 2. The danger of extreme size. Let's start by looking at some physical and mechanical dangers, beginning with a really unexpected marine record holder. So meet the intertidal barnacle. These little guys face a massive evolutionary hurdle. They are sessile, meaning they're permanently glued to rocks. So they can't exactly detach and go out on a date to find a mate, right? To solve this, they evolved the longest reproductive organ relative to body size in the entire animal kingdom. They basically use it to reach out and fertilize their neighbors. And get this, in calm waters, this appendage can actually grow up to 25% longer, just to maximize that reach. But there's a catch. 20 meters per second. That is the speed that turbulent water can reach in the intertidal zone where these barnacles live. I want you to imagine the sheer force of that. When a barnacle extends a super long, incredibly thin reproductive organ into water moving that fast, it creates just a massive amount of hydrodynamic drag.
And well, that brings us to the barnacle's demise. The extreme drag means these organs are constantly subjected to mechanical snapping and severe structural tearing during ocean storms. Plus, when this giant appendage is fully extended, it basically becomes a prime, highly visible target for hungry fish. So if the barnacle can't retract it fast enough, their innocent search for a mate leads to a very literal and very fatal breakup.
Now let's look at a vertebrate record holder, the Argentine lake duck. The metrics here are frankly absurd. This small bird has a spiny, brush-tipped appendage that can measure 42.5 centimeters. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the length of the duck's entire body. And they deploy this corkscrew-shaped organ in an explosive eversion that takes only 0.36 seconds, literally the blink of an eye.
So let's anchor this back to why this matters for the duck's survival. Building and operating a body-length organ requires a highly complex lymphatic system, and that creates a massive risk of retraction failure. If that explosive eversion doesn't perfectly retract, the duck is physically stuck. It instantly becomes this slow-moving, highly vulnerable target for aquatic predators. Beyond that, just the metabolic drain of growing this extreme apparatus means the duck has vastly less energy left over for basic bodily maintenance. It is an immense, life-threatening drain on their system.
But, what if the danger isn't to the male, but to the female? This is where we pivot from male mechanical failures to a much darker systemic population danger.
Section 3. The costs of violence. Fair warning, we are moving into a much more violent form of biology here with the bedbug. And this brilliantly illustrates just how far sexual selection will go for brutal efficiency. Male bedbugs bypass normal biology entirely through a process called traumatic insemination. They don't use a dedicated reproductive tract at all. Instead, the male has evolved this needle-like organ called a paramaphore, and he uses this to literally pierce the female's body wall, injecting sperm directly into her body cavity. As you can imagine, it is an absolute biological nightmare for the female.
The cost of this extreme apparatus is just devastating. In dense bedbug populations where this stabbing happens relentlessly, females actually suffer a 25% higher mortality rate compared to those who are mating less frequently.
Let's walk through exactly how this tiny tragedy unfolds on a population level. Step 1. The male's perimeter creates open wounds, meaning the female has to divert massive amounts of energy just to heal herself. Step 2. Those open wounds become gateways for lethal pathogens. Researchers have actually found human pathogenic microbes like Staphylococcus saprophyticus on these male organs, and they cause fatal systemic infections in the females. And finally, step 3. This drive is so physically destructive that in some lab settings, the males have relentlessly pierced the females until the entire captive colony was driven to localized extinction. The evolutionary toll literally destroys the population.
Section 4. Suicidal mating rhythms. We're heading to the Australian forest now to introduce a small marsupial called the Antechinus, elevating the stakes from individual injury to programmed mass death.
This little guy is the perfect embodiment of simulparity, which is quite literally suicidal reproduction. Instead of mating multiple times over a normal lifespan, these animals engage in a frantic 2 to 3 week mating window every single year, and it is a completely fatal episode. To really understand the intensity of this, 14 hours. During this narrow breeding window, adult male Antechinus will mate for up to 14 hours at a time. The sheer physical exhaustion of this is almost impossible to comprehend.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an inescapable biological cascade. Because to sustain 14-hour mating sessions, the male system floods with absolute toxic levels of free testosterone and cortisol. This massive hormonal surge triggers step 2, a complete and total collapse of their immune system. By the end of that 2 to 3 week window, death inevitably arrives through gastric ulcers, internal hemorrhaging, and unchecked parasite invasions. Literally every single adult male drops dead by the end of the breeding season. They are programmed to procreate and then immediately die.
Section 5. Brains versus Brawn. Our final animal entry involves bats. And this one isn't about sudden death, but rather a really profound evolutionary sacrifice. Scientists studying bats discovered what's known as the expensive sexual tissue hypothesis. The fundamental rule here is that an animal's body has a finite energy budget. Brain tissue is highly metabolically expensive, but obviously crucial for navigating complex environments and avoiding predators, right? Those are your survival smarts. On the other hand, testicular tissue is also incredibly expensive to grow, but it's absolutely crucial for competing in species where females are highly promiscuous. That's your reproductive equipment. Because energy is finite, a choice has to be made. In these highly promiscuous bat species, males can grow reproductive organs that make up to 8.5% of their total body mass. But the trade-off is staggering. The energy diverted to these massive organs is literally stolen from the brain. These well-equipped bats actually have significantly smaller brains than their monogamous cousins. They have actively traded their intelligence, their ability to navigate and survive, just to have a better chance in the reproductive lottery.
Section 6. The ultimate evolutionary price. Let's summarize the brutal priorities of natural selection we've uncovered today. This quote perfectly summarizes everything we've looked at today. Survival is a luxury. Reproduction is the mandate. I mean, think about the journey we've just been on. We've gone from barnacles snapping in the turbulent surf to ducks lugging around metabolically draining weights. We've seen male bedbugs systematically destroying their own colonies, marsupials meeting themselves into complete immune collapse, and bats literally draining their own brains of power. In every single case, the exact tools used to pass on genes are the very things that end the animal's life.
Which leaves us with this final, fascinating question. If nature is completely willing to sacrifice an animal's brain, its body, and its very life just to pass on genes, what hidden evolutionary trade-offs are human beings carrying around right now? What survival traits have we compromised just to propagate? It's pretty wild to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you enjoyed this, be sure to like, subscribe, and keep exploring the weird side of biology with me. See you next time.